In this video, we'll be looking at how to use Google Sheets pivot table function to create a two-way table with this data. Now this data is the class of passenger, their gender, and whether they survived or died after the crash of the Titanic. So to create our pivot table, all we have to do is go ahead and select all of our data. Now that's the nice thing about using pivot tables, is that they'll filter out any and all data that we don't actually use. So we'll go ahead and go up here to Data, click on it, and go down to Pivot Table. Now this is going to go ahead and create a pivot table for us in a new tab, and it calls it, yours will probably be Pivot Table 1, this one's Pivot Table 4 because I already made 3 other pivot tables and deleted them. So now what we can do is go ahead and add the values that we're looking for in our rows and our columns. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to classify this thing and put in on my rows class. So over here is our pivot table editor. And in here we can go ahead and add rows, add columns, and add the values into our pivot table. And so I'm going to go ahead and add rows. I'm going to add the class. So what this did is it went back to our raw data, which is in sheet 1, found the column named class, because remember the first cell in each column is the name of the column, so it went and found the class in the first column, and went through this data and found all of the values in here, and each unique one made it a new entry in the row, so whether it's crew, first class, second, or third class passenger. Now in the columns, I want to go ahead and add a new column, and I'm going to go ahead and add survive/died. So what it did here is it went back to our raw data, found the column labeled survive/died, which is column C in this case, and went through and found all our options, which in this case is just survived or died, and went ahead and added it to the two-way table here. So now the next step is to add the numbers into the two-way table, or into our pivot table. And so we'll go ahead and add the values here. Now in this case, since we're using categorical data, it doesn't actually matter which value we use. So I'm going to go ahead and hit class. And so it's summarizing it by count A. That's what I want. It's count of alphabet. So it's going through and finding each word. So we went back to the raw data and found, like for example, we had first class passenger who survived, and it counted that. And it went through, kept finding all the first class passengers who survived and counting all of them. But so like for example here we have the first class passenger who died. It didn't count that, but it kept going till it found all of the first class passengers who survived and put that number in this box here. There was 200, oh that's crew, in this box here, and there were 203 first class passengers who survived. And it kept doing that for each of these numbers. And over here in the grand total, it just went ahead and added these two cells together to get this 885. Added these two cells together to get this 285. And then over here in the bottom, these grand totals, what it did is added these 4 columns to get this 1490, and added these 4 cells to get the 711. Now we can go ahead and change our values function, so we could do sum. If they were numbers, we could sum them, and since they're words, they're all just going to come in as zeros. Count would count how many times there's numbers in them. Again, it's all words, so that's why we're going to use the count A, which would be these numbers here. Now we can change how it's shown. So by default, it shows them as whole numbers, but we can change it to percents. So for example, we could change it to percent of rows. What that's going to do is it's going to take this number here, this 885, and divide this number by the 885. So 673 divided by 885, and it's going to give us a percentage. And that's the percent of crew members who died. And likewise, if we want to know the percent of crew members who survived, we do the 212 divided by 885. And if we do that, we find this number. So 76% of our of the crew died, and 23.9% of the crew survived. Now we can also change it to percent of columns. If we would use this number down here, which going back and turning it into a number by changing it back to default is 1490. So we take this 673, divide by 1490, and that tells us the percent of the amount of passengers who died were from the crew. So go ahead and do that. Percent of column gives us these values here. Now we can also do it percent of grand total, which takes all of the passengers and uses that in our denominator to find the relative frequencies here.